I'm David from Extreme Vocal Institute, and today I'm going to be answering your questions. Corey Kuhn asks, is there a way you could explain what screaming will sound like when you first start and what the progression sounds like as it develops? Nobody starts out with a totally developed scream by any means. Sometimes you might notice, like the distortion will get a little stuck when you are starting and it will be kind of thin and small. Or the opposite, where it might be a bit explosive at first, depending on the way your body's handling it. We're all different. It's going to be a totally unique experience for you. Give it time and make sure you practice diligently, and you'll feel different things in terms of the vocals start to come together, fold into each other, especially in terms of how the distortion is going to layer itself on top of your regular voice with a false chord scream, and noticing some of the depth coming in. And with a fry, the consistency in how some of the distortion will just leak into the way that words are being said and come together to create that recognizable sound that we're going for. Kartoff asks, would you say that fry involves more constriction than false chords, or do you apply the same amount to both? Fry screams operate best when projected to a certain level. Because without it, it kind of falls back. Whereas with the false chord scream, you can really ease into that without the same level of projection. When we project, things in the throat do narrow a little bit in the vocal tract here, but we don't have to necessarily think of that as constriction. I find when people do, we end up compressing and squeezing really hard to get things going. So if we kind of treat everything like we're trying to make a strong statement, suddenly your false chord screams, and your fries, will all be level and do what you need them to do as well. Simon asks, sometimes I get a headache while growling and they can get quite severe. What are the causes? Getting massive headaches when you're screaming can come from using too much force here, or both. Trying to use too much air is going to stress the tissue out a lot up here. And even without that, if we're working really hard, this can tend to vice grip in, and the muscles of the neck and throat can be squeezing with so much tension it's actually cutting off our blood supply to our head and creating a little bit of oxygen deprivation. And that feeling can be really, really tough to power through, can make you feel a little nauseous. So working on making sure we are controlling our breathing and keeping the vocal nice and calm in the moment will do the best to kind of help keep these muscles here in the throat nice and loose. Making sure you're stretching before you vocalize as well will help to maintain the balance and keep everything in check. Mikey Two Shoes asks, how do I get my screams to be lower and deeper? Is there a way to develop it if I'm not naturally deep voiced? You don't have to have the deepest voice in the world in order to have really deep, intense screams. Whether false chord or fry, if you choose the note accordingly and then shape it, it will do what you want. If you even, for example, take a note around where I am now, if you have access to that, and add false chords to that, and then gradually make your mouth smaller while keeping relaxed, that'll really help. And if you add a little bit of a yawning sensation, just a bit to that, then combination, that'll sound like this. Even though the note that you're doing isn't that low, apply fry to the same thing, and you'll notice that it's not as low, but it will still benefit in the same sort of ways. That one guy, Griff, says, what are some ways to diminish tongue tension or to stop raising the back of my tongue? I know tongue tension affects a lot of people that scream and sing, so here's a quick trick to get that to kind of let go in the moment. If you make the sound E followed by a nice big O and connect them, E-O, E-O. You're starting lifted and raised in the back, but it has to drop and be open in order to say O on the other side. E-O. If you can sing like that, E-O, E-O, E-O. You can get that nice openness, and if you can scream, E-O, 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 you can start to get the same openness and benefit for the same reasons and train that tension to go away. Francis Cronin asks, one thing I can't get a sense of is how loud my guttural growls need to be. Because it's mixed in studio recordings, or I'm hearing it from the audience when other people are doing it, I don't have a sense of how loud death metal vocalists actually are in the real world. When it comes to screaming, there's really no such thing as being loud enough for what you're trying to do. There are some people that do scream louder and project farther, or depending on what you're doing, it might be a much smaller noise, a much quieter one. But when we're recording it, when we're performing live, because of technology, the microphones, the equipment it's going through, everything's always going to be brought to the level where you can hear everything with the music that we're playing. So because of that, it doesn't need to be terribly loud or terribly quiet. The more distorted it is, the quieter it kind of gets, but you still can project naturally with that. My rule of thumb generally is to try to have screams either be just above or just below speaking volume, and that'll keep you within pretty healthy parameters. I get so many questions like we're talking about here all the time, which is why we make sure to factor stuff like this into how we make and curate our EVI Now program, which is our online guided lesson program. Verona Supre asks, what are the basic fundamentals you need to start screaming? To get started screaming, I would say you can boil that down to 4 things. 1, just understanding your voice at all. Sing random songs you like, hum along to stuff in the car when you're going around the house, everywhere you are. Come to understand what you already have and how your body handles making sound like that. 2, a basic understanding of the building blocks of the type of scream that you're interested in and where you want to go, and starting to notice what that's going to be like when you're doing it once you really understand them. And 3 and 4, passion and time spent. Make sure you stay excited about this stuff, and additionally give yourself the appropriate time to practice accordingly when you can, to make sure that you're really getting the most out of it and really letting your body come to understand exactly what it is you want to be doing. Jan's Plashy asks, do you give coaching lessons online? Yeah, I do actually. Head over to our website to sign up for one-on-one lessons with me directly. Being a touring vocal coach has me all over the place all the time, but I am always happy to help with anyone that wants it and is able to. Artsy Dudette says, there are mixed opinions on using support or not when doing extreme vocals. What is your recommendation on this, and should support be used differently than with clean vocals for screaming? When it comes to screaming and even singing, a lot of people get the idea of support with your breath and squeezing confused for each other. If you put a hand on your stomach with your thumb around where your belly button is, and to speak normally, and alternate between that and kind of raising your voice to prove a point a little bit, you'll feel a subtle raise in what's going on, but not a huge amount. And the same goes for screaming too. Any kind of scream you're doing and whatever you're trying to say and the way you want it to come across is gonna involve a different amount of support. But everything kind of exists along this line between speaking normally and being able to get screams to kind of exist on that same level of support. Or if I'm trying to prove a point, depending on what I'm going for, that'll help me get more of my point across, but you can keep it more subtle than you think. Jen Stees asks, is it possible to widen your range? Definitely, and I have a quick exercise that should help you get there. Say the letter B. B. And gradually, B, B, B. One note at a time, B, B. Work your way up to where you can. Try not to overextend yourself, try not to start to push too hard, but don't let go of the support either. Keep nice and calm, B. And you'll start to notice how high you can go, B, 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 or how low before things start to get a little shaky, a little unstable, kind of fall apart a little bit. And day after day, if you kind of test this a little bit, you'll start to expand slowly but surely what the edges of what you're capable of are. Now, you can only extend so far, of course. No human voice is able to go all the way to everywhere, but you'll start to learn where you are able to go and gain more and more as time goes on. Stabs the Giant asks, how would you go about getting a more wet sound to your false chord screams? Sometimes your false chord screams might sound a little dry or ultra compressed. And I've found that if you just relax things and back off of the energy, a super dry, super forced false chord scream, will gradually, yeah, relax, yeah, a little less push, yeah, slow it down a little bit, yeah. We'll give it some of that wetter or fuller sound that it is that you're looking for. And as you play with mouth shape, yeah, yeah, more distortion will come into play. That's gonna add even more. And of course, stay hydrated. The guy asks, I'm a frontman and going hard physically on stage while screaming is exhausting. How can I better manage breath control while on stage? Being able to vocalize with full energy on stage while moving around requires really great oxygen management within the body. And sometimes it's tough to practice that at home or even in rehearsal with a band. Something I've found super useful is to practice your vocals while jogging in place. This is something that will kind of mimic what it's going to be like on stage, having to use your body. But in order to jog accordingly and appropriately, you need to not grip your way into it or do too much. Keep the energy low level, but consistent with itself, and you can kind of match what that's going to be like when you do get into the motions of things on stage, and then match that with the kind of vocals you want to be doing too. Burkwood asks, if you were a long-time singer before you try screaming, can your singing knowledge get in the way sometimes? I've noticed my singing will try to creep in and it ruins my scream. It seems my mind equates shifts in tone and pitch with true melody. Being a long-time singer can get in the way of your screaming sometimes. And this is because you've spent a long time training your voice to very specifically do one thing all the time, and through vocal health, actually learn how to avoid most other things. A lot of times in the beginning, if you're a singer first, your body is going to view screaming, regardless of the type, as a red flag. False chord scream normally ends up being a little easier at first because we're not changing what your regular voice is doing. But with fry scream you are, but both of them involve changes in the vocal tract, and your body may not like that at first, in which case, take your time with all of the individual components of the screams. Try not to relate them to music right away, kind of separate from context so that your older muscle memory doesn't take over too much, and that should slowly but surely help to get you to where you need with your singing and your screaming together. Formless and Void asks, question, how important is it, in your opinion, to have a dedicated vocal instructor early on versus following course teaching? I don't really feel ready for live instruction, but I may be wrong. All of us are different and we learn in different ways. And when it comes to learning how to scream, whether you're using free resources online, using a course program, or working with someone one-on-one, there's no such thing as a wrong place to start. We have all of the above here, and we make sure that in all of these options that we keep people that are just starting out in mind. So if you're worried about what makes the most sense for you, try whatever you're able to try and trust that you'll be able to get what you need out of that and that you can always shift to something else if you ever feel like you need to. Nathaniel G asks, do I fry scream in my chest voice or head voice? Or can I learn to achieve a fry scream from both? Definitely both chest voice and head voice can be used for fry scream. They just sound a little different from each other, so it depends on what you want in the moment. From a chest voice note, for me, if I start to blend in some of the fry sound and project forward, it still sounds nice and powerful and big, but it doesn't sound like super low. That just means when you do use a head voice note and apply the same kind of logic and execution, it'll have even more of those higher qualities that adds a lot more excitement to what you're doing. So choose accordingly. Kyle Dobson asks, is it normal to lose your voice when starting out? Do seasoned performers lose their voice after consistent shows? When you're first starting out, if things are a bit imbalanced, you'll definitely notice some irritation and some new feelings you've never experienced before. If this pushes you to the point where you feel like you're totally losing your voice the next day, or even maybe immediately after, that does mean there's an imbalance of things going on here, and you do want to look at the way that you're balancing your way into the sound to be able to make sure that you can give your body what it's asking for and harmonize everything in a way where now you won't experience that sort of loss of voice anymore. And nobody is impervious to this. This can happen for professional touring artists as well. Anyone can experience imbalance and fatigue, but when handled appropriately, you can get through those situations just fine. Marky Poo asks, I'm finding that I lose some of my high notes when I'm going back and forth between singing and screaming. How do I maintain my singing range and screaming? If you're someone who sings and screams, and you notice that a little bit of your higher register is gone after you've been screaming for a bit, that's usually because there's too much air going through the vocal tract when you're screaming. The vocal cords kind of freeze up a little bit, the edges get a little tense, and that makes the vocal cords moving faster to make higher notes more difficult. So if you balance things air pressure-wise a little differently, make sure to be able to gauge how much or how little you're using at any given moment to peel back a little of what you're using with your screams, yeah, so they don't have as much air, yeah, yeah, they become more refined, yeah, and that will allow, yeah, all of the high end that you want in your voice and all of those higher notes to still be there on the other side. Chris Fox asks, when I try distorted singing, especially higher notes, it sounds really thin and my throat gets tired quickly. So my question is, how can I make it sound fuller and not feel the need to squeeze harder, which causes strain? When singing with distortion, especially the higher you go, yeah, you might feel things get really thin, and that's because of the body just doing too much work. And oftentimes that's because we don't spend enough time with that area of our voice without the distortion. If you have trouble, get this getting there, like in the first place, that's a pretty solid sign of this. So if you kind of allow yourself to kind of exist a little more often, just in little pockets of the day, you'll eventually learn to kind of relax through it as your body gets used to what's going on and understands what you're asking it to do. Then you can start to add in the kinds of distortion that you want to add to other parts of the voice, and then, yeah, you'll be able to get more out of it. Practice this as relaxed as you can and you'll be golden. Make sure you ask more questions down here in the comments because we'll definitely do this again. But that's all for now. We'll see you guys later.